So, Dr. Coates, thank you very much. We are in New Brunswick, in Fredrickton, New Brunswick, at the home of John Coates. This is a recording for the Understanding Social Work Leadership in Canada Oral History Project. And part of my obligation is to do a reconsent. So I just want to make sure that you had an opportunity to see the LOI.
I did.
Do you have any questions in relationship to the letter of
No, it made sense to me.
Okay.
I just have to be cautious of how I express myself.
Okay, well, I will trust your judgment on that. But I do want to just reiterate that we're recording using two mechanisms this morning. We have a voice recorder via cell phone app that's next to you, and we have the video recorder, the video camera. So we're using the audio recorder first as a sound backup, because sometimes sound on a video is not great. But we're also going to create a transcript from that audio recording, and we're going to do a few things with that. First thing is we're going to use it to caption the video recording so that it's AODA compliant and can be used in educational activities. The second is we're going to use the transcript to do analysis. So we're doing some analysis on all of the recordings to look at some themes that relate to leadership so that we can use those for education. And when we've completed the transcript, we will send you a copy of the transcript for you to review. And if there's anything in there that you need to correct or you would like to have edited out, we're happy to accommodate that. So if you said 1976 and you really meant 1986, we can fix that. And if you think, oh, maybe I don't want to share that story after all, we can edit that out. We can't make little edits like, correct your grammar or...
I got you.
But anything you want removed, we can do that. And if there's anything you want to re-record or add, we can also do that, but we'll do it by Zoom. Okay. And once again, you'll have an opportunity to do a final consent before we share the video recording. The video recording will be shared via the program YouTube channel, via the digital repository at McMaster University Library, and a copy will be offered to Library and Archives Canada to complement the original set that's there. Okay.
Will it be listed on YouTube under this research project?
It will be.
Okay. All right. Good. Yeah. All right. That makes sense.
Okay. So do you consent to be audio recorded today?
Yes.
To be video recorded?
Yes.
And to have the material used as described?
Yes.
And you're aware that you'll have final consent before?
And
you'll have final consent before?
Yes, before I get a last shot at it.
Okay, exactly. Yes. You can make a different decision if that's what feels right. Okay, so the other thing is, of course, you can always
stop.
Yeah. So I usually start with a question that will take us back quite a ways, and that is to your early years. So could you tell us a little bit about your early years growing up, and if there was anything in your early life that led you in the direction of social work?
I grew up in Scarborough, Ontario. My parents had 9 children. I was the oldest boy, and it was pretty well a strong Catholic family. So those values of helping your neighbor would be very prominent, along with the religious stuff, but the helping others would be both spoken of and acted upon it within my family. Okay. I played some sports. I was never very good, but I got better as I got older. Went to in Canada, in Ontario, they have a separate school system, so I went to a Catholic grade school and then a Catholic high school. My last year, I flipped over to the collegiate. Just wanted a change. And then I did my undergraduate degree in a Catholic seminary, and I changed views on what I wanted to do with my life. And then I did just a year at York University, just figuring out what I wanted to do. And during that time, one of my uncles said to me, why don't you try social work? And I said, what's that? Because I had no exposure to it prior to that. And so I said, that sounded pretty interesting, because I had done a lot of, in terms of the church I attended at the time had a hockey league. They had the Scarborough Catholic Hockey League. I don't think it exists anymore. But different churches had teams, and I ended up, Jim started that at our church, and I ended up taking that over for a couple of years. And we had fundraisers and different things, and I kind of coordinated most of that. And then after that first year at York, I went in to apply for a couple of jobs. One of them was at Big Brothers Big Sisters, and the other one was at the Catholic Children's Aid Society. And the Catholic Children's Aid Society offered me a job, and I worked with children in foster care for 2 years. And I quite enjoyed that. Mind you, I was quite, I'm going to say, emotionally young, and I didn't know that then, but my colleagues and supervisors did. So after the first year, I was ready to go back to school again, and they said, well, you should wait a while, John. So, okay, so wait another year. And then I went back to Wilfrid Laurier for 2 years and got my master's degree. And I was fortunate enough that the Catholic Children's Aid sponsored my return to school in exchange for a year, working for them at least a year for every year I was supported. So I had an agreement to work with them for another 2 years. Okay, so I came back and I got a job at that. My first job was in downtown Toronto, and the second one was in Etobicoke, which is on the west end of the city. Worked with Barry Whalen was in charge of the department and had a very positive influence on my work. And I worked there for 2 years, and then while I was working, after I returned from graduate school, there was a lot of efforts to organize into unions social workers. And I was active. Peter Bolton was leading the charge at the Catholic Children's Aid Society. And the organization that was formed was called FOCAS, F-O-C-A-S, the Federation of Children's Aid Staffs.
Wow.
And to go back a bit, the folks had tried to interest the larger unions, CUPE and the Ontario UPSU, I think it was called, in Ontario. But they weren't interested because most child welfare organizations were quite small. And there was it took a lot of person power to organize them for the benefit of the larger unions. So that's why we started organizing on our own. And after a while, I became the president of that federation group, and we started to organize unions in the Catholic Children's Aid, and I think up to be about 7 or 8 across the province of Ontario. The challenge was we were small and operating on a shoestring. We had no strike fund. The staff worked for us for a pittance, quite literally, very little income. But that was fun because we was a good group to work with, because they were all wanted to improve the situation that the social workers found themselves in. And it was quite a bit of a struggle because a lot of social workers consider themselves more professional than them as employees. But the mandate to offer services goes to the agency. It doesn't go to the profession. And so we were governed by the Master Servant Act at the time. And I remember one time we started bargaining, and the reason we had low wages was, I remember the executive director saying, "You will get your reward in heaven." So we couldn't feed our families on that. I was still single at the time, but that was.
What year was that?
Oh, this would have been in the 70s. Okay. Mid to late 70s. Okay. And it was also a time when women sorry, I'll reframe that. Up to that time, a lot of child welfare workers were without social work training, and they often came into the work for a couple years, and then they would get married or start a family, and it was considered a second income for their families. And so, because of that, there was less pressure to increase the salaries. But after the 70s, they started to hire more men, and more men got interested in social work, and they were at the time, the breadwinners for many of their families. And so the need for more income, there was more pressure on the organizations to increase the wages and salaries. I remember my first job was the annual salary was $6,000. Anyway, but that's just
And
an
how does that
aside.
compare? Like, because
Well, I bought my first car with that job, and my first car was 3,000. So it was low at that time, but I kind of used that. It was half a year's salary to pay for a car if you wanted to buy a car, and that I think that still pretty close to the reality of people in terms of today's day and age. But that was the context was those two things happening, and one of the reasons I got supported to go back to graduate school was because the agencies they wanted more MSWs, and so they started that time supporting them. But then the they had opened up a lot of BSW programs in Ontario at the time, and so they started to be able to hire BSWs, and so the school started to provide more social work trained people, and so the agencies slowly stopped offering that. We'll help you go get your master's. So that took us to about when did I 75, I believe. No, that's when I graduated from my master's degree in 75.
now, just you mentioned the executive director, and I actually worked at Catholic and
Oh, did
at
you?
that branch. I worked in Etobicoke branch.
Oh,
I worked in North York as well, but and I did
interesting.
license up there. So was Colin Maloney the executive director?
No, Ward Markle was the director when I started. Okay, but that dates me way back. But
All right.
so I came back, worked for a couple years, and then I wanted to do something different. Child welfare was not for me. My wife worked in child welfare and she did very good at it, but it was too much the policeman. I feel very uncomfortable in that policeman role, and so I needed to try a different line. And just as an aside, at the time, we did the child welfare investigation was part of our job, but we also had a lot of people who just wanted talk to somebody about what the struggles they were having with their children. And so we would get a lot of voluntary people phone in and said, I'd like to get some help with Johnny or Sally or whatever. And so we had a variety, we had a mixture in our caseloads of child welfare families who got reported and had to do the investigation kind of things, and more voluntary clients who had some issues and had the wisdom to ask for help. And it was a nice blend of that because you got a taste of both parts of the work. Now you don't have that in child welfare. Now you've got largely strictly mandated interventions, and you would instead of having a mixed caseload of 30, you might have 35 families or more, but they're all child welfare, all active investigations, and much more. What's the word? Formalized, with forms to check and different things like that. And when I was working, you could. We used to say you could give people the benefit of the doubt. Now you can't. Yeah, so you had much less freedom to act than I think there is today. But anyway, that's an aside. So after I left the child welfare Tobago office, and I was planning to have the summer off and take a trip out to the west coast, which I eventually did, but I cut it short because I was offered a job in London, Ontario, by I think it was Catholic Family Services. I may have the name wrong, but my former supervisor, Barry Whalen, had taken a position there in London and suggested I apply for an opening there. And it was with the London Children's Aid Society, London and Middlesex, but they were wanting to open up a community center in Strathroy.
Okay.
And so I became, and it was about a 50-50, half a certain amount of child welfare work, but also work to set up this community center. So I helped, we called it a multi-service center, and we rented an old building and an old house, and some child welfare workers came and worked there. The Middlesex social service workers would come and use the house, and a few other organizations would come in and use the space. So I did that for a couple of years, and then after some years, that's when I applied to go back to PhD school.
Okay.
And during that time, the Middlesex office started to unionize as well. So that was another action I was involved. I was more of an informed participant because I had been the president of Focus. I was no longer, but when I went there, I got involved on the negotiating team with others at the time.
And were the issues similar? Low wages?
Low wages. The issue was many administrations were insulted that you wanted to form a union, and they didn't get it. Okay, and at the time, there was a process that was followed. Usually, the workers would try and have an association, and have members of their association meet with the agency to discuss their concerns. Okay, and that usually there'd be a few minor concessions, and then at some point the management would say no. And then the workers are stuck. What do we do? And so then they would move to the next step of starting to form a union. And so that's when, and then started a whole process there. And it was a few years after that the larger unions in Ontario discovered that there was it was worthwhile to organize the child welfare workers, smaller social agencies. Because at that time, I think in Toronto, only the Jewish Family Services was unionized. And then the Toronto Children's Aid went with one of the larger unions rather than Focus. And so I wasn't involved in, but I think just Focus couldn't manage to stay afloat. Because the others could offer a strike wage, which we just didn't have the money to do that. But at that time, anyway, that's where I was. Going back to PhD school.
And what motivated you to move from practice to doctoral studies? Was there something in particular?
I wanted to teach primarily. I wanted to teach. My experiences in school have been fairly positive. Yeah, that would be my motivation. And I was interested at the time at the organizational elements of involved in practice at the time. That's why when I went into Toronto, that's why I took many of my courses at the business school. But I was accepted at Toronto and also at Delphi University in Long Island. And Long Island has one of these programs where you can actually stay employed, and go to Long Island for a month or so, a year, 6 weeks, a couple times. So I started with did a couple of courses there, that first session. That was in June, July, I think.
And what year was that?
That would have been s- 79,
Okay.
or I think so. I would think in 1979.
Okay.
And then I'm back so in September, what do I do? Do I go to Toronto or do I go back to Adelphi? And I chose to stay and go to Toronto. Okay. At the time, there was more financial support for folks at U of T, and none at Adelphi. And anyway, so I ended up going to U of T
In social work?
in social work, yes. And the benefit of that school in particular, Delphi's was a defined program. You went in the administration stream or you went in the therapy stream. And it was still, I didn't want to go in the therapy stream because I still, one of the courses I ended up taking my first few months there was studying on Freud. And he was on his way out, but it was still preached
Yeah.
as a practice method. It was very interesting, but anyway. But I did take one of my best courses I've ever taken was offered by Dick Lodge and Joe Vigilante at Adelphi.
Okay.
And it was a course, I don't know the name of it, but they looked at the major social work thinkers, authors at the time, who made significant texts in the development of social work knowledge. And the purpose of the course was, what I remember from it, was they wanted us to what was happening in the world around the time that these authors generated their ideas. Okay, and so you were looking at the context which gave rise to or informed Mary Richmond, Jane Addams, Florence Hollis, other people who contributed to the literature. And that was an opening of my mind because I'd never been led to explore that dimension before. And that was, I'm grateful for my time. We were 6 weeks there because that was a really positive course in terms of my own knowledge development. And then I went to U of T, I did 4 years there. I remember Mark Doolan saying to me at the time, you can't learn anything new until you're willing to question what you know. And that has stuck with me in terms of, because a lot of times when you're a student, you're learning new things that challenge what you think and what you've been led to believe. And you really got to open your eyes to explore those dimensions. And I've repeated that phrase many times to students over the years. Ernie Lightman was there. He taught the policy course, which was good for me because I did a little bit of one of my papers on the unionization issue. And I learned in that process that unions are just like other organizations, and they often limit what they do by the dollar. They were interested in just bread and butter issues, and you couldn't budge them off of that to initiate profession. Because the first thing dropped from any kind of collective bargaining is any kind of desire limiting caseloads and things that were important from a professional nature got dropped. They would not support that, and they also have a bit of a self-interest as well. And so I had this rather grandiose fairy tale thinking about what unions did because Focus really did try to do those other things. That's why it was started. And then when I started to study the union movement more generally, and especially the larger unions, they weren't as what's the word?
Altruistic.
Altruistic. Thank you. That's the word. As I had thought they should be or could be, and did this. So anyway, that was because I remember almost being in very emotional when I did my class presentation at that time, and I wasn't even sure why. I was getting, but then one of my other colleagues who knew me from my other years' documents told me because unions aren't altruistic anymore, and that kind of helped me get to that conclusion. Anyway,
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's funny because when I applied to U of T, wanted to work with Bernie Lightman, and I sent him a proposal about doing stuff in relationship to unionization, and his response to me was "Don't bother." So,
well, when I was doing that work, I remember talking to the folks up in Ottawa, Carleton area, and I because I did a presentation at one gathering on the stages that the workers go through to get to this level of going to decide to unionize. And I was told I should write it up, and I kind of regret not doing that, because then after a few years later, it became okay to organize and unionize, and so more agencies came in. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a minute. Yes, and more doable. It became more accepted by the profession. And then I was back at PhD school. My major paper at the end of my studies was on, I don't remember the name of it exactly, but it was on the impact of the reality that social work is offered from agencies. And those agencies' rules and regulations have an impact on what you can practice.
yes.
And most idyllic social workers don't realize that. And those agency rules, agency regulations have a tremendous impact on how you work, who you work with, the types of work you can offer, and those kind of things. So it was trying to make a case for the importance of knowing the impact that the agency structures and agency regulations can have on practice. Actually, then I did my dissertation on upward influence in human service organizations. And it was on what personality factors, academic factors, organizational factors might hamper or enable someone to have more upward influence in an organization. And I, so I did one was a group in a region of the Ontario government, the
Ministry of Social.
thank you, a ministerial region, and I used those supervisors. My friend Barry was helpful in getting me access to that population. And Sidolian, who was my supervisor at the time, enabled me to get access to another group. So I had a good number of those two organizations, and there were several sub offices within those organizations. So we did that. Bob House at the business school was sort of my guide in much of that. So that was done, and with all the anxiety that goes with it. And I started teaching at St. Thomas I moved here in '84. And I had all but my last chapter to write. So the first year I was doing that horrible job of getting used to being a prof and writing your course outlines for all the new courses you had to teach, which you've never taught before. And then I wrote my dissertation, my last chapter at the same time. And so I finished the following June.
So about
85, I convocated. And then we moved here in '84. I remember driving here. We had a convoy because I had the truck loaded with furniture. Judy, my wife, had the station wagon with her 2 kids at the time, and a niece who was helping out with the move. So we came here. We came August 1st. I remember driving into town, into the main street, and there was this beautiful Wilmot Park, which is very close to here. And it was a bright summer day, and the wading pool was full of kids and families, and it was what gave me a very positive first impression. So that was.
Fredrickton is a beautiful city.
It is a beautiful city. It was. It still is in many ways. Growing very rapidly right now. Okay, so over to you.
All right. So tell me a little bit about what the school was like, what St. Thomas was like when you got there. What was the focus? Who was here? Were there particular issues that were important in the profession at that time?
Well, Bob Mullally was the chair, and he was doing a lot of his first writing around structural social work. And so he had a big influence on putting that direction within the school. When I came, he was the only one with a PhD, and then I became the second. And there were 6 people. It was a small department, and at that time, St. Thomas still only had about 1,200, 1,300 students. So, and all the faculty were scattered. They didn't have locations, and that led to a pretty strong community sense within the faculty. And there was a bit of you could go and talk to the president. You'd come into the cafeteria, you'd go and have lunch with him. Access to the president and vice president was easy, unlike a lot of other larger institutions and even unlike where St. Thomas has become now, because the more administrative personnel get added to the top, the president gets further and further removed from access. But you could go in and have a coffee with George Martin if you wanted to in the morning. But the big issue that I recall was largely the move to structural social work, and that becoming a bigger influence. Because that was not where my head was. I was much more ecological in my thinking at the time, and still am in many ways. And St. Thomas was also going through some initial struggles around office space and buildings, so I ended up being in one of the buildings with all the social work faculty in another. And then they had other offices, because some of them were even in some of the residence rooms because there wasn't enough office space. They took over a floor of one of the residences for office space. But shortly after they built, the name escapes me, a new building on campus, an extension to that. So that opened up quite a few more classrooms and office spaces. And then when that was, so then we got most of our offices together at that point. But that didn't happen till probably my 4th year or 5th year here. And actually, we were still probably the only faculty that actually had their offices relatively close together. Now it's different now, but because there's more buildings, and as new buildings and new spaces got used, some of the departments started to localize.
Right. And what were the students, not like what were the students like? What I mean is, did you have a traditional direct from high school composition
No,
of
good question.
students, or
No, we did not.
Okay.
At that time, St. Thomas only offered a BSW program. In fact, for all my time there, it still only offered BSW programs, I should talk about that at some point too, because that's both a limitation and a strength. And the program was, the students took their first 2 years in arts, which is common, and then took their last 2 years in social work. And in their second year, they would take the 2 social work intro courses, and then they would apply at the end of their second year for admission into the 3rd year of social work. Okay, and so, and we, because there were lots of jobs available for BSWs, we had a lot of older students come back to school, take the intros, and apply. And so, in terms of acceptance, we would have the average age of students in third year was 29,
Okay.
and so there would be a pretty good mix of younger students, fresh out of high school students, and older people, some who have had in mid-career, 30s, 40s, decided to go back to school, and some who had been stay-at-home moms and wanted to go back in the workforce, and so they'd be 40 years old and coming back to have a degree but come into social work. So it was quite a range of ages. It was lovely to have such a diverse group, and they did a good influence on each other, I think, in terms of I'm going to call it the calmer status of the older students with experience, and the enthusiasm and questions of the younger students kind of were a good mix. So that was fun, and it was quite. I think it was quite envious for many of the other faculties in the school, in the university, because we got to pick the best students. We'd have like a couple hundred applicants for 25, 30, 25 spots. And so the students were all top-notch academic students for the most part. And that made our jobs considerably easier. But most importantly, it led us to have a good crop of graduates who then would work in the field and be highly recommended. And then so that got feedback that St. Thomas was a good program. So then we got even more good students, good applications come forward. So it was self-reinforcing. That was really
Good placements.
good place. Yes, yes. And so the university locally got a good reputation for its social work graduates. And it made it possible to open up field placements. And often students would get hired after their field placements by the same agencies. That kind of thing was happening. So that was good. So something good was happening there.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. You don't have to, obviously you don't have to answer any question, but you said there were 6 of you, Bob, yourself. Who else was there at that time?
Sandra DeVink was there. She was only working half-time. Barb, I forget Barb's last name. She was doing a lot of the field work. Marilyn McKay was there. And then there was Susan Nine came for a few years after that. I know. Mike Howarth was there when I was hired, but left immediately, so I never got to work with him. And so we started to have basically there were some rebuilding going on. One of my first hiring decisions was I was involved in for Brian Willett, who at the time was the social worker up at the hospital, and we hired him. It was a wonderful decision. He became one of my best friends and colleagues, and was liked by everybody, including the students. And that happened probably maybe 2 or 3 fairly early in my time at St. Thomas. And Brian had such a self-deprecating manner. He was a humble guy, but very genuine and very real, and a very good teacher.
Excellent.
And he brought some good therapeutic skills to his job. He was so delighted he couldn't believe the university paid him to go to the library and read up and study and get on top of literature. And then Sandra was interested in moving from part-time to full-time. And that was a bit of a challenge for us because I think we wanted everybody to have a certain length of professional practice experience as well as your academic credentials. Okay, and she just barely had the practical experience. Even though she was very good at what she was doing, she had been working at the university for a long time on a part-time basis. But then she came on full-time and did a lot of our field placement work and taught the group work course. And slowly the faculty changed over time as Marilyn moved to PI and we had to hire somebody for hers. And then that's when we started to have a position being able to hire PhDs. So now everybody on faculty is going to have a PhD or is in process to have a PhD. Judy worked with us for a couple of years, one of those during while she went and got her PhD from Memorial. Ariel Dillon is still there, and she was hired probably 5 or 6 years before I retired. She's a friend. Then during all those years, Bob left. He went off to Australia for, I think it was 5 years at one time. And that's when I became chair for a while. Sandra and I chaired at different times. I was chair for quite a few years. My big achievement was getting the Department of Social Work changed to a School of Social Work. And we got approval to pursue a graduate program, but although it was never implemented when I was there. They started one after.
And you wanted to speak about the benefits and the challenges of just the SW book.
Well, from a faculty point of view, with a small school, you have to teach everything. And so, and we were expected to teach 6 courses. So there was some point I know some students would take 5 of my courses because they were all, and if the students liked you, that was great. If they didn't, it was a bit of a challenge, but you got to know the students very well for that. And so it was a very, it was very close-knit, to be honest. And we would often have socials, and I know sometimes I had a couple of socials in my house, and the students would have a party and faculty would get invited and would come. So it was that happened for several years. That went that way. The disadvantage from a faculty is that you can't focus all my publishing, all my writing is done in areas I never taught. Okay, and whereas if you were in a larger school, you might teach policy and nothing but policy. Okay, and so your abilities to develop a reputation, to develop some expertise is greater. Okay, you lose your generalist skills, but you can specialize. And that's the same in a bureaucracy, but nonetheless, it's a disadvantage if you only wish to teach a narrow view. It's a real limitation from a faculty point of view. And it does interfere because it's very hard in a small program where everybody does everything to become specialist enough in an area to actually get published, because you're doing a course on an intro course, you're doing a policy course, a course on community work, and it limits your ability to actually focus and learn enough about a particular area that you can actually publish in it. Or you can, but it's more work because you've got to read outside your teaching areas. Yeah, exactly. You're octopuses. You've got more balls to juggle. Yes. I didn't know that. That's my learning from ahead of time. And if I had to do it over again, I would have spent much more time, as much as I've enjoyed my 30 years at St. Thomas, I would have spent much more time learning about the benefits of different institutions. Okay, and when you're young and you just want to get hired and get a job and get teaching, it's worth time to take some time for those professors to look at the universities, their size, their benefits, the health benefits, the benefits for your children if they go on to school kind of thing. And I didn't think of any of that. I just was, I could have, at the time I was offered a job at McMaster or St. Thomas, and I just felt more comfortable here. And we had been living in Toronto. I grew up in Toronto, and Hamilton was too much like Toronto, so we wanted to come someplace new.
Thousands of people would argue that that's not true.
Yes, especially the Hamiltonians.
No, probably more the Torontonians who would say Hamilton's nothing like Toronto. But
Well, it was certainly too close.
fair enough. You wanted a real change. So
We
you
wanted,
got a real change.
we got a real change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, because that's as my own children grew up and entered university. Some universities give you free tuition. Some pay half tuition. Some will. There's our universities in Canada that will send the children of faculty members to any university and pay the tuition. Oh boy, that's sweet. Anyway, I didn't know those things, but that would have been very helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, that's an aside. But
Sure.
my-
That's good advice. So what were some of the highlights of your time at St. Thomas, like more generally? Were there particular research projects that you took up? Were there people that you collaborated with? How did you sort of move through your time?
Well, I even though I was young when I was at university, and I was emotionally a late bloomer, and I was a late bloomer as a faculty member, because I really didn't publish anything for the first 5 or 6 years. I tried to do something for my dissertation and wasn't successful in my first effort, and I got discouraged. And I spent a lot of my time working with a couple of nonprofits. I became involved with a couple of nonprofit agencies in town on their board, the director, chairman of a couple. And I spent quite a bit of time in my first years in the community doing work like that, and then just trying to become a more competent teacher of several courses. One of the courses I developed was one that, based on my own research, was the social work and organizations, and that was the name of it, and talked about what I talked to you about the impact of organizational structures on your abilities to practice, and also teaching students about what the research was on upward influence, on how to be seen as more important to your agency. So when you talk, they will listen, because most of us think all they need is a good argument, and they'll listen. And if you're nobody and they don't know who you are, like, why would they listen to you? And so you have to prove your worth, so to speak. And I used to call it homework. You have to be known for what you do. You have to be competent at your job. If you're not competent at your job, don't worry about anything. But if you're competent at your job, you have to be recognized for doing something else that benefits the agency. You're a good committee member. You're good in the community, and you're known in the community, and that kind of gives feedback to the agency. So you have to be seen as an asset to the agency. Then you can speak. So I'll reframe that. Then you will be heard. Okay. But without that, then you're barking up the wrong tree, as the expression goes, because you have to earn the right to be heard. And students used to get annoyed with me it's the same as, well, I remember one of the students had an assignment one day, and to make a proposal to an agency director. Use the Human Development Council here in town, or the Social Development Ministry, and make a proposal to them. And the purpose was you had to translate what the need was in a way that the manager would understand it. So they would hear you because you are addressing the problems the agency recognizes. And every year there would be a group of them who would come up with all wonderful, good social worky reasons why this should happen. The needs of the people, the benefits to the children, the benefits to the community, all wonderful altruistic reasons why. But the budget, the management is concerned about their budget. That's all they care about. Okay, and so they need to align what the students see as needed with what the goals of the agency are and translate what you want to fit what the decision makers wish. Okay, and there was a whole process we went through on how you can learn those things and how you modify it. But very often they would not be totally, they'd be oblivious and uninformed about the needs of the management or the preferences of management or the goals of the organization or the pressures they're under, and limit it to their usually direct practice interests. And they didn't get heard. And they would come up with, one group had about 40 good reasons why something's needed, with totally ignoring what the pressures are under that the decision makers must respond to. And you got to present it in a way that the management will listen, that meets their needs and their agendas, along with being recognized as someone worth listening to. But anyway, that's
very
that's an aside too.
So that was the
Organizations course. One of the assignments was that one. But the leadership in the department only happened. I became chair after Bob left. No, actually, he was here for a year or two before he left. And then I think others, we kind of traded off periodically. But I was chair for probably 6 or 7 years. I don't remember all the details of that, or the dates, sorry. Okay, ask me another question.
Okay. So it sounds like you focused really on teaching and learning and community engagement.
Yes.
In your first years. Later on in your career trajectory, were there other research activities that you undertook?
Yes. I started with, well, we'll start with the spirituality one. Brian introduced a course on spirituality and social work. At the time, it was the first one in Canada. He had gone down to the U.S. and to one of the first meetings of the Society for Spirituality and Social Work, which Ed Canada started the late 80s or the early 90s, in that range. And so we thought Brian wanted to do a bit of a research on what the impact of the course was on students. Okay, so we had this model presented, and I came on to help him do that. But almost all the students in the social work program took his course. So you couldn't do a comparison to students who didn't take the spirituality course to students who did, because 95% of them took his course. So we did what we could, and the students who benefited most from his course would have been students who had no religious background, because they learned about other various religions, the expectations, the demands, the impact, and it kind of opened a door to them, because if they grew up in a non-religious background, they may be very ethical, but they don't have an appreciation of where the role of religion is in the lives of other religiously based families. So Brian's course was probably around, he would take students down to the
Synagogue, mosque.
Yes, to the mosques and the what did the Jewish face?
Synagogue.
Synagogue. Thank you. That's the word as you get older, these blanks come. You just, what's the word? It's not there. Okay. And so that was very good. Then one year, I accompanied Brian down to my first conference, the Society for Spirituality and Social Work in the States, and we presented our findings and that kind of thing, and I got introduced to folks like Ed Kanda, Fred Bestorn, those two, Cook, Michael Sheridan, who were all active in the American Society. And then that kind of piqued my interest, and because I had begun to do a lot of work around ecology and the environmental movement. Oh, there's one other thing I got to mention. So anyway, after that first conference, I got more involved in the spirituality end of things. And eventually that led in 2000 to the beginning of the Society for Spirituality and Social Work. But I'll come back to that. While I was in the U.S., I met Fred Bestorn, who was very much an interest in ecology, and he also had a bit of a ministerial background. He had been a minister for a few years, and so he was blending the ecology and the spirituality together. And my brother at the time, because I was beginning to develop an interest in ecology and reading about environmental crisis and different things like that, and my brother suggested I should read Thomas Berry, because he was he was a school teacher and was finishing his Master of Divinity at Toronto, and one of his teachers made a lot of reference to Thomas Berry. So I picked up Dream of the Earth, and that also, it just opened my eyes, and Thomas was making a case for the importance of rather than looking to religion for guidance, looking to the earth for a moral value, for guidance around ethics and decision making. And that got me hooked. That remains one of the more influential books that I've in my own life, my academic life. And I had a sabbatical in, I came here in 1990, after I had my first sabbatical, and I was off to Toronto. Went to Toronto, that was home. My parents were still alive, so we had 3 kids at the time, so we could give them a chance to meet Grandma and Grandpa. And I was I wanted to take a couple of courses on adult education, so I took that at Oise. My friend Bill Randall was there at the time, and he was getting into the narrative world. And while there, one of the department, Bob asked me to do a course. We needed an upper level policy course. So we asked if I would design one while I was at school on sabbatical. So I said, sure. So and it also gave me a chance to get into the publishing game, because I had several papers I had started, and while I was there, I finished 3 or 4. And in this course I developed, I looked around and what was happening, and what I discovered happening in the world was globalization. The train was on the track and it was coming down. And the second one was the environmental movement was gathering strength. And the third one was more my personal observation that at Oise in Toronto, whenever you went into the foyer of one of the larger buildings, it was filled with, I'm going to call it personal development literature, often local, getting your
Remember the learning annex?
yes. But there was a lot of advertisements for becoming a better you around it, whether it was meditation or Tai Chi, thank you. The guys who go around singing mantras all the time, when dressed in orange, Hare Krishna.
Yes.
All these folks would have little brochures, and a lot of them dealt with personal development. And I was aware of the decline in religions at becoming. Reginald Bibby was starting to write about the decline of religion as a force and people's attendance, but there was still an outreach for personal development, growth, becoming a better you kind of thing. So those three issues I worked into that policy course. Globalization being the big one, but that also sparked my interest in spirituality, especially for those who you might label as spiritual but not religious. And so, and as well ecology. So I built those into my policy course that I taught. But it also led me, that's what, after that, 1990, I started to really get interested in ecology and environmental issues and became more active with Brian around working with this for the spirituality and social work end of things. And then in 1997, I had a second sabbatical, and I took a 6-week, they called it a retreat, but it was, it's not really a retreat, it was an opportunity to study, for lack of a better term, and focus. And it was, and it was offered in just outside London, and the passionist priests had a retreat center there, lovely old farm area.
So London, Ontario.
Yes, outside London. It's funny, I should remember the exact where in the name. I know they called it the Holy Cross Center, I know that. But that year, they had Thomas Berry coming for a weekend, and a different weekend, Brian Swim was coming for a different weekend. And so, and the focus was around ecology. And they had, I can't think of the two people's name who ran it. I apologize to them. But they coordinated it, and one was a colleague of Thomas Berry's, in terms of a member of the same religious order. And the other was a woman who edited some of the books about Brian Thomas Berry. And, sorry, don't remember. I can go get the book if you're interested, but anyway.
Yes, we'll
Okay.
love it.
So that's when and during that time, I wrote the first chapter to my 2003 book, Ecology and Social Work. And so that got me going on that. And that was in 1997. And so then in 2000, I guess I wanted to put in context here because it was in my first sabbatical in 1990, that's tweaked me interest in ecology and spirituality became prominent. Okay. And then in 97, I started writing more earnestly in the area of ecology. And I had been with Brian to one of these Society for Spirituality and Social Work conferences. And so in 2000, there was a major conference for social work in Montreal, and it was the IFSW, International IASSW, and the CASW all had their conference in Montreal. They merged that year.
What year was that?
2000. I remember because we applied for money from the university for the whole department to go down and to go to this conference. And so we went down in 2 vans full of folks. It was a good time. But I met, at that time, Brian had been corresponding with folks, and we got together with John Graham and Barb Schwarzentuber, who John was teaching at Calgary at the time, and Barb at Renison College. And we met and talked about forming the Canadian Society for Spirituality and Social Work. So we actually decided at that time to form it. The 4 of us were initiating that. And Brian and I agreed to put together a short proposal to try to get a grant to host a conference, the first one.
Wow.
That was quite a challenge. Anyway, Brian and I did that. I'd never done anything like that before. And it was just, the university was just becoming computerized. That's another thing that's new in this process. Because when I came to St. Thomas, I was the third faculty member with a computer. But my computer ended up with 2 floppy drives.
Yes, and you used to put one in and go make coffee,
Oh,
come back.
that's right.
The operating system and
That
log
was
in.
it. And so we formed the society, and then Brian and I did our best to put together an application. And I remember the university had a computer lab, and they allowed us to stay up, and you could only save a page at a time. So we were putting this application together. So we were talking and writing it up and typing it up, and you were doing it a page at a time because it wouldn't save it. Okay, so you had to do the application. So we spent several hours one evening after doing all the research for ourselves, getting to putting in the application. And it wasn't as luxurious as you could fill it in and come back to it the next day because it wouldn't be there. So we had to make sure everything was ready, and so you'd print it off, and then so we finished it. I remember one day about 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, we actually submitted this grant application. Anyway, it got approved. So in 2002, we had the first meeting of the Canadian Society for Spirituality and Social Work. And that was at the University of Toronto. It was just for a day. And we tagged it along with the end of the CSW conference, CASW conference. And Ed Kanda gave the keynote. And Fred Bastorn came and several others. And it was a good day. We had about, I think, the better part of 100 people. So we were delighted with the outcome of that. And Susan Cadell came forward and joined our group at that time. And then Jeanette Wagermaker Schiff as well. And we had I forget who our contact was at the University of Toronto, because usually we had when we tried to have conferences in the past, we needed a local person to look after the local organization of things. And we tried one year without one, and it was a disaster. So then that started us on a road to trying to have one of these every year. So we went 3 or 4 years with, the second year was in Dalhousie and Winnipeg, Calgary. We had one up in Thunder Bay. So we moved the conference around. Initially, we tagged it along with the CSW, and then that got to be complicated because they wanted us to join as one of these partner members or whatever they call themselves, and then that means they wanted money to get labeled, and we didn't want to pay a couple $100 a person to just so we could be part of that welcome group. But anyway, so we started to have our own, and so we had maybe 4 or 5 conferences, and then we were running out of gas, and the society in the States was having challenges, so we started to do a joint conference. And we would do it one year, and they would do it the next year. Okay, and so that worked well, although more Americans came here than Canadians went south. And we still tried to have it at universities using the university residences because we wanted to keep the costs down so practitioners could attend. Okay, and we had it in different centers so more different practitioners could attend. So I think, I don't know how many we had, 10, 12. So we had several conferences, and the the 2 years off was wonderful. Having every second year, hosting one every second year, because organizing conferences became more and more challenging. It's very challenging today, much more difficult than it was even 20 years ago. And so COVID kind of put a damper to things. And the team was, well, because there was a core group of us that ran them. Myself, Brian, Susan Cadell, Rose Jeanette, John Graham, Eric Crowther from Thunder Bay, and a few others. I'm sure I've not done justice to everybody. Heather Boynton was helped us organize the one in Thunder Bay, and then she went back and got her PhD and was now in Calgary. So there's different groups. The folks that helped us along the way. Diana Collick was a member for several years. So most of the folks who had an interest in spirituality were associated with the society and had a role in it in some way, shape, or form. Laura Bearers was active for a while. But people usually, as is normal, people come, work hard, and then move on to other things, and that's been the case. I think my main contribution, I was the stationary person around which a lot of these things happened.
Right.
And then after COVID, we struggled. We tried to get one conference done for Vancouver, and it didn't work. And there was partly the financial risk was too high, because the university wanted to rent us X number of rooms, and they want us to guarantee that X number of rooms would be rented, and we couldn't do that. We didn't have the money to do that. Usually, up to that time, you'd have about a month or two's notice to book your. Okay, these are booked for let's say 60 days before the conference. So that's when you had to be firm, and we could live with that.
Yes.
But when you're several months in advance and they want you to guarantee you're going to pay for 100 rooms, I can't guarantee you 100 rooms. I don't know. We might sell 120, but we might only sell 90, and we couldn't. We had no resources to risk that. That's almost the situation today in Calgary, because there's a conference planned this June. But there's so many things on in Calgary that all the hotels want guaranteed. They want your money now, because they're rented to somebody else, because there's so many things happening. Anyways, that's another aside. But so there was a few years we didn't have a society, and no one came forward to try and to be willing to steer the ship, so to speak. And I tried to slowly look after whatever funds we had accumulated, and St. Thomas was kind enough to hold it for us until someone wanted to come along. I didn't want to be the lead anymore. So Cassandra Hanran came last year, and they had a 2023 conference in Halifax.
Very nice.
So that was the first one. And Cassandra was willing to become president for the time and help it get established. And then this coming year, then the 2025, it's going to be held again at Calgary. Heather's going to take an initiative there. And at the present moment, Buida is a coordinator with a new group. And it seems, anyway, there's some new faculty coming in that have an interest in the area of spirituality and have come on board. Quite a few, even a different group, different from the ones that helped plan the recent Halifax conference. Buida Warkentant is the current coordinator, and Heather and Johnny Margolin are looking after coordinating the conference itself. Both are members of the CSSW board, but they're hosting a conference is enough work for them. And some of the board members are on the planning committee for the conference. So I'm trying to exit myself from that. So I'm
the keeper of knowledge, but not the.
Well, I work with Buida on the board. I'm staying away from the conference. I will be going. I've booked my ticket, but I'm not in the planning exit strategy group.
And where is the next conference?
Calgary.
Calgary.
Calgary this June. Okay, I think there should be, they've advertised it briefly, and but the registration just opened recently. So they need to get on a distribution
Yes.
pretty fast, a PR program very fast. So my leadership role there has been, I think I've been the cog around which things have functioned. And I've had a wonderful group of folks to work with over the years. And there was a core group I've mentioned who held it for the first several conferences. And then it's natural that people go on and go. And what we had trouble finding is someone who wanted to carry the ball, or even a core group that were willing to carry the organization forward. And so was in hiatus for a while. So we're trying at this point to get it restarted again. And I think if I look at my career, one of the things I have been is a center around which other things can happen. I've coordinated a community garden here in town for many years. And just this past weekend, I stepped down as president after, I don't know, 12 years, 15 years as president. We went from 35 plots to 100 and some. So I'm quite pleased with it. But with that one, I spent a couple of years actually working with groups of other folks. So there's now 6 or 7 folks on the executive who are coordinating the garden. But it took a while because when there were 35 plots, one person could operate it. But when there's 100 gardeners, you can't do that. You need help.
Yes.
And I think the society similarly. But it needs, and the job of the president coordinator is not onerous, but it requires you to keep people on task and remind them of our meetings. And because academics are horrible for attending meetings because everybody's got such bizarre schedules and different schedules, and the hours across the country vary. So to have a regularly scheduled meeting is always a challenge. Even if you want it on the third Thursday of the month or it's at 2 o'clock, that works for one semester. It won't work the next semester because people's teaching schedules change. So it's always a challenge. Okay, that's next question.
So you mentioned your book on ecology. Were there other publications that you wanted to mention?
Well, at the time, my book came out in 2003. Fred Besthorn started his a website at the time, the Deep Ecological Social Work website. And that's where the blend of spirituality with ecology is right out front. And I approached it in my book and after that a little differently because the more I got into ecology, the more I got into the notions of everything is interdependent, everything is interacting with each other. We are all one, to use that notion. And that's where it became a worldview, a kind of a spirituality in its own right, where your meaning comes from being part of this evolving and evolving world we live in, a part of the evolving universe. Brian Swim, in one of his videos, has it out where after the Big Bang, the world was nothing but hydrogen, and now, give it several billion years, it's us. He has pictures of flowers and children, and that's pretty well how this process has happened. And so that for my own self brings together both my interest in ecology and spirituality. My other books Well, when I wrote mine, there was only one other one and it was a U.S. book. I'll give you the name of it here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I saw that little bundle of books, and I wondered.
Yeah. Well, those are books that my own, and then four of them that I had edited.
Okay.
I have to figure these, give you the right name because they deserve to be mentioned. My apologies. This is. Looking through this is going to spur my ideas to give you many more.
Oh, very good.
Huff and McNutt,
Oh,
Marie Huff, and they had a
John McNutt.
John McNutt. They had their edited book out a few years earlier. That was the only other one in North America that were written on the area of ecology and social work. There had been a few articles up to that point. But my main interest at the time was to advance the notion that we need a new paradigm, something other than modernity, because modernity is the culprit that's fed into the exploitation of people and the planet. But it's now it's accepted as an important part of our lives, and as is spirituality. And in the U.S., they've even got spirituality as one of their built into their
Accreditation.
accreditation standards. Thank you. So where I've been excuse me, a leader in Canada, I would say both in the area of ecology and in the area of spirituality. It's been a group around which other folks have gathered and come joined in and have worked together to put forth a lot of good scholarship. In the area of spirituality, John Graham was very helpful because we co-edited a lot of journal articles based on conference presentations. And Fred and I and Michigan Lysac out in Calgary had a conference on ecology and social work one year, and that also led to a journal issue. So I think there's 10 journal issues or so I've actually taken part in, but all have been the result of conferences
Right.
that have gathered. Mel Gray and I met Mel in 1990 in Lima, Peru, when there was an international conference there, and she was just finishing her PhD, and I introduced her to structural social work. So anyway, but she's also become a good friend and colleague. We've published a few books together and edited, and she's gone on to create a wonderful scholarly record, several hundred publications. I don't know how she does it, but she does.
Did you want to talk a little bit about some of the edited collections?
Well, I could. Well, Mel has the capacity to bring people together around, like I did here with spirituality, but bring groups of people together around issues that are important. And one of the ones was we have in Canada the fortunate thing of government grants for research and government grants for academics. And I used one of those to pull together, this is where environmental social work came out, because we planned this I got a grant from a SSHRC grant to pull in people from around the world to talk about environmental social work. Maybe I'm getting, hang on. No, I'm wrong, I lied, I'm sorry. It's this one, decolonizing social work. Indigenous Social Work Around the World.
Very good.
That's the one. And that's where we got the Schiff grant. And Michael Hart was quite, because the Indigenous folks got angry at the beginning when we first started, because Mel and I did not have an Indigenous member of our group. And we quite appropriately were chastised for that. And Michael Hart, I give him credit for pointing it out to me in particular. So Michael Yellowbird came on board and became a co-editor with us. And then we gathered here in Fredericton for a week and invited people from around the world, from Africa and the US and different places, to all talk about elements of what sometimes is referred to as indigenization, but it's much more correctly called localization. We should have, when we finished reading it, we should have called it localization. It'd be more appropriate, because that's what's happening with Indigenous social work. They're localizing it to their culture and their place, and in other parts of the world, they're localizing social work to meet the needs of their communities and using the traditions and culture within which it's going. And that's so. Anyway,
And that's a bit of a contrast to globalization, which creates this idea of this one solution, sort of one solution social work, this professionalization model.
well, yes, that was because many universities in the U.S. and Canada made big dollars and these big grants to go to other places
Yeah.
and tell them what and often imposing this Western model of social work. Now maybe I'm too strong in imposing, but certainly putting what they were teaching was what they understood, which was this Western model of social work. And some of it is not appropriate for their cultures within which they were trying to go. And even if you go to talk to a social worker in South America, they're doing an awful lot of community work because there's no social welfare network as such. So the people have got to develop from the grassroots. And so community work is much more vital, much more essential. And so social work is a community development work. Okay, and in many third world countries, that's what's more important. Okay, and whereas in other places, in some of the social work that's developing in Hong Kong, Singapore, the larger cities, where there's an industrial base, they're often dealing with the problems of industrialization. So a therapeutic model might be more relevant, okay, because of the kind of problems and issues that are arising. But what's needed depends on what's happening in the local context. And that's what the localization is doing. And this idea of, and this Western model of social work is, it's fine for us, but it's even as problematic. We can say, we can argue that one, but and it's even in Canada because since I've been in social work, there is a much larger Canadian-based literature source now. But when I started, it was still primarily American. It wasn't. It's often that you're in a Canadian School of Social Work and you've got an American textbook, and you have to translate some of the language to our context. But at least now there's much larger scholarly base of work that's Canadian. But that's all developed, and good, and rightly so, I think. Because the U.S. model, which when I first started social work, everybody wanted to be a therapist. That was you go back to social work school, I want to be a therapist, and so I did. And now you were almost coerced to study organizations and study community work and social policy. And then it doesn't take you more than a year in child welfare to realize that the policies do make a difference. And so you want to go, and how do I influence the policymakers? Because that's really what needs to change. When you have issues of poverty and poor health and housing as critical issues, it's the policies that need to take that social act. They need the social action, and less so the therapeutic elements. Anyway, ask me more questions.
All right. So that was 2 of the books, I think, or 3 of the books?
Well, the Indigenous social work around the world was one I did with Mel. And then a bit later we did environmental social work. And that was an updated, and I forget when actually that one came out. 2013. These I finished at the tail end of before I retired. And it carried out into retirement. And then the other one was decolonizing social work. That's okay. Oh, this one too.
You didn't want to be left behind.
Well, this was around reacting to colonization and the efforts of people in various parts of the world to break free of that. And it follows quickly along the the localization of social work, because social work very much was a tool in many ways as Western society influenced developments in other countries, and with globalization trying to impose a model that benefited the West much more than it benefited many developing countries. And so their decolonization part is again making social work relevant for local contexts. This one, spirituality and social work, was came out of the first conferences. So we included in this some of the papers from the first few conferences that the society had. Okay, because one of our goals was to increase the scholarship around spirituality and social work in Canada, and increase Canadian scholarship. And so myself, John, Barb, and Brian, we put this one together. Brian died before it actually got published, but that's he died in 2005, and this came out about the same time, shortly after that. But that's again, that's an edited collection.
Coming out of the conference.
Yes,
Which is lovely.
Well, it was. We were
kind of legacy.
Well, it was we were very pleased to see that, because that was one of our original objectives, to get more scholarship out there, and the 4 of us were able to work together to put that out.
Excellent. So since retirement, what have you been working on?
Oh,
The garden?
well, I've always been a gardener, and I've always had an interest in woodworking. So what have I been doing? It took me probably 3 years to become more retired, because 2 of these books didn't get published till after I retired. I retired in 2012, and 2 of them came out after 2012. So I was still finishing off these. And it was comfortable. Retirement is very comfortable. If you have enough money in retirement, it's very comfortable. I've done a lot of housing projects around the house. I've ran the community garden, as I said, for several years. I've taken up wood turning in earnest.
I thought so. I was looking around, I'm like, there's a lot of barrel
Yes.
work here, I think, perhaps.
Well, that's, yes, I have different samples here.
Beautiful.
And I even have my own website. I don't use it very much, but I've done it long enough that people will give me a call if they know me, and if I got any bowls or whatever. I have some for sale in downtown at the Urban Almanac, a store downtown that he carries the bowls and different things candlesticks and
Beautiful.
pepper mills and different things I've made.
Wow.
And then I go to one Christmas market. It's hard to sit all day, for all day. So I only do one market a year, but that's enough. That keeps me enough money to go buy new tools, and keeps my interest up.
Things that you make, right?
Yes. Empty the closet is right.
Yes, yeah.
That's right. But I've also maintained I have a foot in this spirituality and social work. I've still been involved in that in a peripheral role, more supportive than anything. Ariel got me involved in a conference a couple of years ago now around spirituality and religion and social work. And she had a group meeting at St. Thomas. And I think folks are still writing on that that journal that comes out of that. I put a paper together, but it's still in process. And what I've been right now, I spent the last few weeks talking about consciousness, because in quantum physics, the idea is that the ideas preceded reality, what we understand as reality. And a lot of studies, and there's a lot of work nowadays in neuroscience around how the brain functions and what's happening in different parts of the brain. And then also with the area of and some of these scientists are beginning to look at religious traditions and meditations for some of their information around how the brain actually functions and absorbs knowledge. And many of those studies are putting forward again the notion that what we see in reality is more got to do with what's happening in our brains than we always looked at the modern world. The scientific view is this is a table and this informs us. And yet what these folks are discovering that over our development, the mind has patterns of expectation that interfere with, that dictate how we perceive that table. And so the argument is becoming not to deny that reality does not exist out there, but in terms of understanding what we see, what we're seeing are images in our brain more than this physical table there. So anyway, it's hard reading for me because that's a totally new area. But what more interests me is what I talked about when I met with Ariel, is that the world, I'll use the example of this map about carbon emissions, and the graph is going like this, way up high, compared to over the past 100 years. Mm-hmm. And human population is going like this. And so is human knowledge, because the more people you have in universities, the more educated people, the more the knowledge development is also going up in this very, very sharp curve. And one writer, McNeil, talked about, I think he used the word emerging, because we're going someplace fast. And and I think for our societies, we often get caught with climate change. But the one thing climate change does is expose the faults of our modernist worldview, because the excesses of modernity have created the climate crisis. They've created the immigration crisis that we, just talking to the youth, listening to Mr. Trump is the worst example of the outcome of that. But my desire would be that we would have a kind of an ethical view or a worldview where the world can see itself all as one. And the images from space, because everybody goes up in space and sees the Earth as this little blue ball from a great distance, has this, what I've understood from them is they get a new awareness of how fragile and small this planet is. And when we're running around on it, we don't see it so clearly. But I would like us to see we're all interconnected, we're all contributing to this process. Each of us can play a role, each of us has a role, however small. And we're all interdependent, so it helps us, for me, to realize that my welfare is dependent on your welfare. And I cannot be the best I can be until everybody else has that same opportunity. Because when you're the best you can be and have enough, Okay, that's going to create conditions for everybody that benefit me and allow me to do more, so to speak. And it's a spiral.
Mhm.
It's not a back and forth, although it feels like that sometimes. It's a spiral up. And all these changes we're going to get there's a crisis point's going to happen. And I'm afraid it may happen more from a negative point of view than in terms of the climate changing so much that life becomes more difficult for everybody. But there's also the other piece of that is that I think we've been focusing on humanity as the epitome of creation. We have this arrogance that we are, because we have this thing called consciousness, and we're the only species that has as much consciousness, we think, although that's not proven, that we have this privileged status and we're the elite, and but we're only ever a very young species. You know, if you look at anthropology, we've been around our 70,000 years maybe, and most mammals live to be 1,000,000 years.
Mhm.
So if we're, as a species, we're very young. Homo sapiens is a very young species. And so who knows what we might yet become if you believe in evolution and changing over time. And I think we should be much more focusing on the joy that comes from becoming part of this growing, evolving, what are we going to be? We don't know what we might become. That's kind of exciting. But it requires us to live in a balanced world that's going to self-reinforce. Okay, and we're not there. So that's where I think all these things that are emerging and coming to a peak, almost and it may be some combination of AI and robots, or AI and technology. I don't know. We'll see. But as a species, we're still evolving, we're still growing, and I think it's very arrogant at us to think that we're the best we can be. I've had this argument with ministers who still go back to the scriptures as the absolute and sometimes literal truth, and it's not. That's just a phase. And our understanding of what all that stuff meant is very different now. With our knowledge base, we can understand that it's we look at that scripture, there's still a meaning there, there's maybe value there, but it's got to come from our current knowledge place. And I think a lot of things we've done have interfered with that. There's a writer called The Arrogance of Humanism, and I think that's an appropriate term. And we need to see ourselves as an important element of all of creation, of all that exists, but certainly one that's interdependent on all the other species that are out there. Anyway, but that's, and this evolution thing, if you get behind it, it can be quite an exciting prospect to know what might lie ahead for us. We don't know. And if you accept evolution and the chance aspect of that, we don't know what Brian Swim calls them key attractors around which new structures evolve. We don't know what those are going to be yet. We don't know what structures of society around which things are going to create. But we certainly have to think at a global level. Our politics has to become at a global level. And it's frightening right now because we seem to be breaking off into island kingdoms like our president south of the border. Okay, and aggressive ones because they want to take over other populations because it benefits them. And we've got to start seeing the world as we're all in this together, folks. And we need to celebrate the diversity and inclusion and find ways of cooperating and sharing rather than always to my benefit. And I don't want to make anyone's life less rich or enjoyable, but most people in North America have lots. We have enough. We don't, and we can share some of that with other people. And what we have happening now is Well, we know just the money the billionaires have, how much more money they have than 50, 60, 80% of the population. And there's something totally unfair about that. As clever as these folks are, there's something unjust for that. And I think very unethical from a moral point of view as well. And I share the fear that many have of that if we become too self-centered, we're going to have another war or another violent outbreak, and there's evidence of that now. And it's sad to see that. And I must, some days I'm optimistic because when I see there's so much knowledge, we know what the world can do. There's examples of really good things happening in different parts of the world. And yet at the same time, when the politics being as it is, you just shake your head and almost get quite dismayed by and disheartened by what we see happening. And I flop in between some from cynicism to being
Yes.
spirited.
Maybe there is good enough. We're all gonna die. I might edit that out.
Well, but that's a risk. That's a real risk. And I think certainly how humans live is going to change. And that might be by force. Okay? Because I think that our planet Earth is a self-governing, self-organizing system. And it will do what it has to do to survive. And that all those interplay of many forces, well, something will happen.
Yes.
And humanity might be part of that, might be a good part of that something happening. Okay? Or it might be the victim of something happening. And I don't know what that's going to be. Right now, it doesn't look too good. Because the temperatures are still rising, and we're realizing more and more what the impact of that's going to be. People in Florida are still buying land by the coast and building these multi-million-dollar homes this much above sea level. They don't, anyway, that's crazy. I was there a few years ago and I couldn't believe what I'm seeing. Anyhow. But climate change is more worth it. The ocean currents are changing. If they change, Europe's temperature is going to change. Sorry, Lamp. Yet at the same time, there's really good things. There's things happening in the U.S. around using buffalo herds to salvage land that's been turned to dust because they're putting the buffalo increase the flora and fauna because of their natural fertilization, but how their relationship to the soil and the earth. And so there are many national parks, or 1,000 acres here and 5,000 acres there, that are being regenerated. So there's lots of many good things happening. But also, on a global level, not fast enough. And we still have parties like the current president, like our former prime ministers, who deny climate change and do things in their power to minimize the impact of their own scientists. And well, you put your head in the sand. Anyway. So anyway, I'll stop there.
So I just have one final question, and that is, what advice, put it like that, what advice would you give to a social worker who's entering into their career, who wants to be innovative, engage in leadership, engage in change? What advice would you give to them?
Change takes time, but it also starts on the edges of knowledge. Okay, if you look at knowledge as I guess there was a video came out, Joel Baxter. Anyway, it was called the Business of Paradigms. It's an American video, The Business of Paradigms. And his argument is that paradigms give the how to succeed. That's the whole, they all involve science as an example of that. This is how you measure, you precisely measure, you look for the data. So, those are the steps to success. Okay? But each paradigm has its boundaries. Okay? And the boundaries are, there's always people on the fringes. And that's where the change occurs. Because the boundaries of the paradigm don't fit all the circumstances, or our current paradigms, such as modernity. It did as well, but now we need to move beyond it. We need to incorporate all those good things that happen from modernity, okay, but move beyond it. And the change happens when you move outside your paradigm to bring in new changes. And it's often frowned upon, it's not accepted, it's a different way of doing things. But if we look at significant changes, they've always been at the fringes of the paradigm. Spirituality, for many years, despite having accepted that as the roots of social work, it was not part of practice. The same with the environment. Okay, it was not part of practice, but now it's incorporated. And we're going to be incorporating more and more and more. And so multidisciplinarity is going to become much more important. One of the books I'm reading is Dreaming Reality, but it's written by some people who are neurophysiologists in the medical field, plus long-time meditators who come into the long traditions of meditation. And they're bringing their stuff together and working together. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do down the road, is not isolate ourselves, bring in changes from the fringe, or we're operating on that. And you've got to persevere. I think you've got to, enjoy and value what you're doing, but you also need to persevere, to stick with it, and trust that somewhere down the road things will come in and come around, so to speak. For me, I've had some really good people to work with, and who've worked with me around these projects. I think of Mel, John Graham, Barb, Brian, when we started the society. Mel Gray in terms of my own academic writing. Fred, we've done a little bit of work together, but he's been a bit of a good informer of my own thinking and learning. So we need to be, I'm moving off your question here, but a little bit, but be open to the information coming from, you need other people. You can't do it alone. You got a network. Thank you. But most of us I didn't seek these leadership roles. They kind of happened to me as I progressed. It's a little bit, I remember sitting here in town a couple of times around leadership in nonprofit organizations. And somebody talked to me about that, and because both Judy and I have been active in the community. And they asked, well, I never wanted these jobs. I did them because nobody else was willing to do them. And I think a lot of leaders are filling those positions.
Yes.
Most academics don't want to be the deans and directors. Some do, some make a career of it, but most would rather just do their kind of professorial work. And I think even most leadership positions around, whether it's a supervisory one or director of an agency, people often take them because it certainly works for nonprofits. Nobody wants them. But I think, anyway, I'm mumbling around here a little bit, but I think leadership is something you move into. It's not, I don't even think you apply for it. You just do your work, and sometimes these things come forward and you jump you grab the opportunity. Yeah, that's all. I'll leave it there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and for inviting us into your home. Are there any final thoughts that you want to share before we conclude?
I've had a very privileged life, I really must say, in terms of, and most professors have a very privileged life. We always complain about the workload, and it's always fun to talk about students and how students are changing, but it's a life of privilege, and I think we need to take advantage of that and give back to the society that has given us this life of privilege. Most do. Most professors have a side work or doing something to give back to the community, and that's all good. We all do it in our own ways, but I think it's important to always be part of a community and not become one who's too interested in what they themselves are doing all the time. I met a woman today just coming out of exercise class who said, "I spend all my time playing," and I didn't impress me. I think it's something we all have to be part of a community and give back to the community, and and help others also be part of that community. That's a policy issue. It's a personal life issue. It's a practice issue.